Professor Steiner here. Today I want to talk about the difference between competition and combat, and I'm afraid, to the strong disagreement of many, will insist is a choice that needs to be made by almost everybody. And that is, you can have a competitive sport or you can have a combat system. And the reason I say almost everybody is because there are some people who, because of their superior physical equipment, their natural strength, their natural agility, their athletic acumen, and the fact that they combine that with a total devotion to the physical art, they can manage to have both. Uh, John Blooming was one of those people. His protege, Chris Dolman, who is still alive, an incredible fighter. And he combines a tremendous capability in, for example, the UFC, MMA, and in actual self-defense. But here's a man who is a power lifter, a huge guy, very powerful, and he doesn't do and didn't do anything else. But there are very few people like that. Most individuals must focus on one thing, and there are reasons for it. Psychologically, there is no similarity between a sport and close combat or self-defense. I know that people do need to use determination and serious will to win. They need discipline and all of that to excel in sport. And they do need that in training for self-defense. But there's something else that's needed in training for self-defense, and that is a warlike attitude. It really wasn't competition, but the little semi-competition that I was involved in many years ago was in Taekwondo, in sparring, freestyle sparring. And I just remember how I felt. I never wanted to hurt anybody, ever. And on those occasions when I accidentally punched or kicked somebody, I felt terrible. I felt worse than I felt when someone accidentally punched or kicked me. I also had an experience in the South Bronx once where I defended myself against someone who attacked me with a knife. I did not give a damn about hurting him. I was very desperate. I kicked him hard. He slashed my hand. I remember the pain was felt afterward, and I was very, very much shocked by the situation. I was coming home from teaching, and it was quite an experience. Nothing like sparring. Nothing at all like sparring. I had another experience in a friend's store once. This actually happened in New York City. Of course, I couldn't carry a firearm. I used to carry a buck folding hunter, and I had a nub attached to the blade. This was long before the flicket. This was a long time ago. And I carried it in my outer pocket. Thank God I never had to use it. But there was one occasion I was in a friend's store, and I remember where it was. Any of you who know about the Bronx know about Fordham Road. It was a novelty shop on Fordham Road. Very nice fella, my friend. And I was standing there by the counter talking to him, and this big guy came in, stepped up to the counter, and asked my friend to see something. And he showed him something, and then he said, "Well, can I see that?" And he pointed to something on a shelf where my friend would have to turn around and reach for for the item on the shelf, completely turning his back on this individual. I was standing next to the individual, and when my friend reached, I was convinced because this guy started to put his hand in his pocket. It seemed to me like he was reaching for a weapon. And I made up my mind then and there. I remember it like it was yesterday. I put my hand in my pocket on the buck, and if this guy pulls a gun, if I see a gun coming out, I see a weapon coming out, I'm going to block his hand and I'm going to open up his carotid artery, because I know this is going to be life or death. He's going to be armed. He's a huge guy, much bigger than myself, bigger than my friend. Out comes a wallet, and he made a purchase. And I remember how I felt. Unlike in anticipation of a sparring match, which was kind of enjoyable in Taekwondo, I felt sick. I walked outside the store. I felt like I couldn't speak. I felt nauseous, shaky, and the unpleasantness lasted a good half hour. Then I was myself. I didn't even get a chance until I was recovered to go back into the store and talk to my friend and explain to him why I walked out of the store. It was a very traumatizing feeling. The anticipation of perhaps needing to take a human life, and the situation of defending against the guy with a knife. These brought home to me personally how different the real world is from competition. Now, I'm not trying to take anything away from enthusiastic competitors. I'm not. I am not against sport. I am against sport being used as self-defense training because, as I say, they are different. There are so many differences, you should know them yourself. You never encounter multiple attackers in a sport. You're never attacked from behind in a sport. Your opponent is never armed in a sport. Your opponent does not use foul methods in a sport. You and he adhere to the rules of the game. He doesn't pick up a chair and swing it at you, and you can't pick up a chair and swing it at him. There's no desire on the part of your opponent in a sport to maim or kill you. Your opponent is not under the influence of drugs or liquor. He might be under the influence of steroids, but that's a different story. That should be detected, and he should be disqualified ahead of time in a well-run sporting event. There are more differences than that. You're ready for competition when you compete. If you're not, if you're ill or if you have an injury, you cancel it. You don't cancel an attack. An attack hits you like an assassination attempt. You're not ready for it. Even though you've trained to be ready for it, your readiness is not the equivalent of the readiness for a competitive match. There's a certain sense of astonishment when it's for real. You have to understand that. I know that this is unpopular, what I'm saying. And there have been a number of people, some pretty despicably, who have misrepresented what I teach and what I do, who believe, which they have every right to believe, that the sporting approaches are okay. But they've used their belief dishonestly to advance sport as self-defense or as combat. It is not. And you need to understand that very, very clearly. When you're training for self-defense, you are training to immediately injure devastate another human being. This is your purpose. If you are training in a self-defense course where that is not your purpose, you're training inadequately. Your teacher is shortchanging you. When you have to defend yourself, you don't play games. You don't hold back. You don't restrain yourself. And you certainly don't want to get him in a submission hold. Let's say you got him in a submission hold. What are you going to do now? Make him promise not to do anything and you'll let him go? Come on, this is ridiculous. This is not the way you can do things in the real world. Self-defense and combat are two different things. And in understanding that, you should be able to see that training for sport this number of hours per week and training for self-defense that number of hours per week divides you. You'll end up with a sport that's dangerous or a self-defense method that's watered down. That's no good. There's nothing wrong with a competitive sport. There's nothing wrong with being a competitor. There's nothing wrong with devoting yourself to competition. If that's what you like, go ahead and do it. But if your focus is self-defense, you want to be concentrating on actions and tactics and a mental set that is geared for war, because that's what self-defense is. It's war in microcosm. So consider this very seriously. Take it very seriously. In a sport, you can afford to jockey about with someone. You can afford to spar. You don't spar in a self-defense technique. Look at animals. If you look at if anybody out there, if you're listening, if you've ever seen Doberman Pinschers or German Shepherds, these dogs are easily capable of fighting with and taking a grown man to the ground, as evidenced by the fact that when they're trained for guard duty or police work, they can do that. But if you ever notice when one of those dogs is playing, it snaps and backs up. It gestures with a soft biting action, and then it backs up. It jumps around. And if you watch two dogs do that, they jump around each other and they nip at each other. But when that dog attacks, it drives in hard, latches on with its teeth, and does not let go. It's very similar in self-defense versus sport. In sport, you can afford to spar with somebody. You could have a round two. There's no round two in the street. You have weight classes. There's no weight classes in the street. There are serious restrictions in sport, and there should be. There has to be. This is not putting sport down. It's putting sport in its place, just like you put self-defense and close combat in its place. By doing that, you're simply establishing it for what it is. I would never pretend to be training somebody to win contests. I'm training somebody to take an attacker by surprise and cripple him, maim him, or, if God forbid his life is at stake, take his life. Use deadly force. I'm not playing games. I teach women to defend against men who attack them. I teach people to defend themselves against armed assailants, attacks from behind, attacks from groups of people, multiple assailants, attacks when they're sick, attacks when they're with their family. When you enter a competitive arena, you're not there with your wife and children. You don't have to worry about their welfare. While you're defending against this guy, nobody's attacking your wife or your child or trying to kidnap your child. These are things that happen in the real world. You have to train for them by developing a repertoire geared to war and combat. That's what self-defense is. That's what we teach in American Combato, with no apologies to anyone. If you don't agree with me, fine, I respect your right to disagree with me, but this is what I'm presenting, and I think it has reality behind it to back it up. And I think if you'll do due diligence, study war, study combat, study conflict between individuals, you'll see that what I'm saying is exactly the truth and what you need to know if you want to train effectively for self-defense. Thank you.